Okay, so I'm going to show you how to make just the most basic hexie out of a square. If you know anything about hexies, you know that hexies aren't square. Like if you were going to make an octagon, that would fit into a perfect square. But since we're doing a hexagon, that's a little bit different. So what I did was I started with a 6-inch square. So there's no seam allowance in any of these templates. This is a 6-inch square, just drawn down the middle with a red pen, so I can mark that. This is not my cutting line at all. So the sides of a hexagon are 60-degree angles. So we know we need to draw a line 60 degrees from these points. Because our hexagon is going to be 6 inches across, the easiest math on this is that all sides are half of that. All sides are 3 inches. So to find the 60-degree angle, the best way to do it is to find that 60 degree right on your cutting mat there. Pop the center line right in the intersection. Make sure on this side that that lines up with that as well. And this line is 60 degrees. So what I'll do is I'm just going to make a little mark right here and here. Turn, and then same thing. Over turn, making sure my half is on that line. And then this way. Okay, so that's half of them marked. So you can measure from here to here and just make those same marks on the other side of your center line. Okay, so I look to this measurement and it's 1 1/4. So at 1 1/4, I can make a little mark right there. Just before you make any marks, of course, just make sure that your lines are all fitting along. Like this is really important. We want to try to make this as accurate as we can, keeping in mind this is handcrafted, so it won't be perfect. I mean, the other thing you could easily do is Google 6-inch hexagon and just print it off, and there you have your template that we can mark and play around with. But you know what? It's kind of nice to know how to do this and understand the angles. I think it just makes for more success where you're just like, okay, I get this. You don't have to be a math genius. All you have to know, from point to point, this quote 6-inch hexagon will be 6 inches. And each side from corner to corner will be 3 inches. So if you were doing a 4-inch hexie, your sides would be 2 inches. But what happens is that it's not going to be a perfect square. So even though it's 6 inches from point to point, it's going to be a little bit shorter than it is wide, almost an inch. So hexagons fit in together really well, but they don't fit perfectly into a block. So I am going to mark in Sharpie now, because this is going to be my cutting line, from the point, the very center to the mark that I made. And a lot of times I just like to look at the measurements that I have underneath just to make sure. So the only other lines we need to do here now is measure from the other side to that line. And then we're going to have a real odd shape, so don't panic quite yet. And then same thing here. Okay, so we're close. So that looks really odd. But remember, these lines are only supposed to be 3 inches. So these lines measure 3 inches to here, but when you measure them on the angle, they're not 3 inches. They're 3 and, oh, I suppose a half of an inch or so. So we're gonna put that 3 right on the line. And then we're gonna make a little dot there. 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 Okay, and then all we have to do is just take and slice that off. What I'm doing here is I'm making sure that my ruler is straight along. I've just got a straight edge. It doesn't really matter where or what number. It's just as long as it's a straight edge here, it's looking the same here. And then I want to make sure that my dots match up. So I'm going to take it just a little bit further. Okay, and then here, that center line is 1/8 of an inch away. Pretty darn close. So just take your time and just eye everything up, and we're going to try to get as accurate as we can. And then we'll just slice that side off. And then just like before, this is about 1/8 of an inch. Let's get there. Just under 1/8 of an inch away. So once you make one move on the ruler, you just need to make sure everything is still matching up. Okay, and then we can slice this part off. Okay, and then we're free to go ahead and slice these lines off. And then we'll go ahead and measure it just to see how we did. So just slice all your corners off and you'll have the outer line of your hexie. Okay, and then another good way to do a check to make sure that you've got a proper 60-degree angle is just put your hexie side on the line, and we can go ahead and measure it. Pretty close. Actually, it's right on. So that side is 3 inches. We'll scooch it away a little bit. And then that side is running up at a 60-degree angle. So these are super valuable, these things. And we can just turn each one and make sure that we're liking the angle, that everything is 3 inches. Yep, this will be fine. So what I want to do is I want a paper piece within this hexagon. So what we're going to do is just make a few lines. The center of your hexie to each corner is 3 inches, okay? But you can see that even though my hexie measures 6 inches this way, it's just over 5 inches here. So it's a squatty piece, and that's just the nature of hexies. But there's so much you can do with them. They're so, so, so fun. So now what I want to do is 1 inch away from each side, I'm going to make a long mark here. So you can kind of start to see that when we cut these lines, we're going to have these great little templates. But I want to do a hexie in the center of them. So what I'm going to do is just mark some more red lines. This will also help us know too if we're measuring good. So we are at 1 and in between the 6 and 7/8 here. Let's see how we did. I'm just going to draw a line. Okay, we already have that line. Let's measure that. Okay, that dot is falling between the 6 and the 7/8 measurement. Same, so we're in good shape here. Here you want to make sure that this is lining up with the corner. So in other words, this could just be a straight line coming all the way down. Also look here, make sure that you're measuring out on the same side. like this is all matching up. Okay, and then the last corner, of course, making sure here, making sure here. All right, and we can ignore this line here. We've got our hexie lines. So then, take my Sharpie, and we'll just do another hexie. It doesn't really matter the size so much, because these are templates, so it doesn't, there's no true and proper way to figure this out. However, to make it easier, why don't we just do an inch away from these lines? So when you have your ruler up here, I've got an inch and an inch. This is laying right on the 1 6/8 line here. So just turn your hexie. Okay, I'm lining this up first to make sure I'm going to get an inch. I'm looking at this to make sure I am 1 3/4 inch away, and that line is perfect. Measurements are all the same, so we're looking really good. Now we got to figure out how we're going to get that in there. I don't want to cut around and I don't want it to float. So what we're going to do is just take a line from this to this corner, which is just under an inch. Okay, it's 7/8 of an inch. So we're just going to go over those little red lines I did on each one, making sure they're all 7/8 of an inch so that we know that our math is good and our angles are good. It's always good to make sure that you can see the red line, you know your whole line here. And you round this out. One last line, and then we have our templates. Awesome. So that's all there really is to doing piece tests. There's straight lines, they're matching angles, and it's pretty simple math. I know math is super hard, but it's not too bad. Okay, we've got our master template. So we are actually going to use the paper for our templates. It's called English paper piecing. All kinds of different paper was used back in the day to do this. So we're just going to use regular copy paper. But for the love of all that is holy, do not cut your master template. You definitely want to make a copy. So what you're going to do, I made a copy of this, and then of course the outside lines didn't show because I used the edges of the paper. So I took another piece of paper and just drew the outline of the hexie, and then I took it and put it on my copier and made a copy. I scanned it into my computer, so now all I have to do is just keep printing this out if I want to make more. But of course, you can just keep making copies. Let's say you have a copier or printer at home that makes copies. You're not really sure how to scan in or what have you, or go make a bunch of copies of this. But just don't make a copy from a copy from a copy, because it gets a little distorted as you do that. So this, if you want to write, I can tell because this is like the original red lines, but write, master copy, set that aside, and then you'll have your copy. So now I'm going to cut this apart. So for the outer lines, super easy. All I'm going to do, and of course still making sure that everything is lined up here on the side, right? That the line is falling evenly within all of the lines. I'm just going to cut this apart. Now, of course, you could label your fabrics. I don't really find the need to do that because I know the shapes, and we'll put it back together before we assign the fabrics. But this is just such the fun part. So now I've got this little short one, obviously, because I cut that diamond off. So I'm going to set that aside. And then again, just making sure we're straight, right? This line's really important. And then of course you cut your outer lines as well. I'm gonna put the line on the inner line, and then, because my line got a little funky right here. Okay, and then just cut that line right? So you get the idea. Just cut all the long lines, and then I'm gonna take scissor and just cut all of the inner lines and then put it back together like a puzzle piece so I know just exactly what I have here. Okay, so putting that on the inner line, looking around, that line off, and then I can go ahead and cut this line off. Okay, so basically just cut it all apart, and this is the copy, remember, that we're cutting, not the original. Okay, so obviously I didn't put exactly the pieces together where they originally were. I mean, that would just be silly. And in theory, these are pretty close to all the same size, so it doesn't matter what piece goes where, because we did a really good job with our measuring. And there's always a little bit of manipulating you can do as we sew these pieces. But now the fun part, we get to choose our fabrics. So I'm kind of thinking birds. So my center hexie is going to be this nest, super cute. Then I think I'll surround that nest with this brown branchy fabric. Then for here, this fabric kind of reminded me of bird seed, so I think that's going to be super cute. And then in every diamond, I'm going to put a little bird. So we talked about fussy cutting in the last video. We are going to fussy cut these little birds so that they kind of are centered within the diamond. Super fun. But we're going to start with the hexie in the center, and this is like essentially what paper piecing hexies is all about. So I'm going to just move all that. Doesn't really matter, I know what shapes are which now. And besides that, we have our master template to look at if we're confused. Okay, so I've got my center hexie here in this cute little bird's nest fabric. So I'm going to fussy cut this little guy out. I'm going to use a Frixion pen, or you could use a pencil, a chalk pencil, whatever, just not a Sharpie, because you'll see that through the fabric. And on the back side of the fabric, now technically the template would be turned down, but all of these pieces are symmetrical, so it really doesn't matter. And we'll just outline this shape. And then that will be our center. Yay. And take your favorite fabric scissors. I always use serrated here, I just like it. And you're going to cut it out with 1/4 of an inch seam allowance on all sides. All we're going to do is just put glue and fold this fabric over the paper. And this is just fabric glue and a little glue stick. You can even just use good old Elmer's glue stick glue for sure. Okay, fold that over one side, and then you're just going to do the same thing on all sides. I'm on Colorado, so it gets really dry here, so I try to just be mindful of keeping that glue, like even if it's just in the cover for a minute while I'm working. I don't have to think about it. Fold that, and just pull the fabric down towards you so that you can ensure that the fabric is right up against the fold. And then just make sure you glue on the fabric sides to hold down the last piece. And there's my little bird's nest center. Okay, so I'm going to set that aside. So the next pieces were these little short squatty pieces. So you'll have two that are similar shape. These taller ones are the outside one. These are the inside ones. So the branches, I'm not going to worry too much about fussy cutting just because this pattern is swirly and there's no direction to it really. So for all 6 of these, same thing. I'm going to just try to make the most of my fabric. When you're putting your pieces on, this is actually on the bias. If I were to put it on this way, it would be on the straight of grain, but these sides would be on the bias. So I'm not too concerned with that. I'm going to build in my 1/4 inch here. Just outline it around every edge and then cut out that 1/4 inch shape. Now, of course, you can take your piece and just do this over and over and over again to save time. It's probably what I'll do, but what you do have to make sure is that you're mindful that there is a 1/2 inch space between your pieces, because obviously we want a 1/4 inch here and a 1/4 inch here. So just be really careful you're not butting them up. That's not enough. 1/2 inch right there. And I am a 1/4 inch away here. So I think what I'll do is I'll just go ahead and mark all of these, all 6, cut them all out, and then glue them just around every side, just like I did in the Hexie. Then for the seed fabric, I am going to pay attention to the direction there. So in this case, not the direction of the grain line per se, but the grain line of the print. It's probably just the easiest thing to do is just to put each piece along a straight edge of this. So just be mindful, and that way when it comes together, all of the pieces will look, you know, they'll all be following in the same direction. It doesn't matter if you decide you wanted to do it all willy-nilly, and who cares? Totally. But if you have a directional fabric like a zigzag or a stripe, then it becomes a little bit more important to be mindful of the print direction of your fabric. So same here. I'm going to just outline these, make 6 of them, and put them on all 6 of my templates, and then we'll come back and talk about the bird, because he needs to be pretty well fussy cut. Oh my gosh, this is gonna be so stinking cute. So much fun to not so much pre-plan everything and get the surprise when you flip all your fabrics over. I really love the way this is gonna turn out. So what you're looking for is once you've got all of your templates surrounded with fabric and glued on, you just wanna make sure that, you know, we're gonna be sewing these together. So these edges match, which they do pretty well actually for just doing all of this by hand. I'm pretty pleased. And then of course making sure that these seams match. Now the little flags that that are here, I leave those on. Don't clip those because they nestle really well. So when you go to stitch these on, you see how this can sit right on top of that flag, and then this flag tucks right under, and you've got a pretty good matching seam. And there is room, a little bit of room for manipulation, so if everything isn't like 100% perfect, we will manipulate it when we stitch. So I'm going to set that aside for now, and let's talk about this bird fabric that we really need to fussy cut. I played with the first one. Now this is just Frixion pen, so it's not a big deal. I can iron this away and this will just go, so not to worry. But it's so hot out, I just don't want to plug that iron in right now. So we're going to go on down here. This fabric is centered much better. This little guy, he's just off center. If I cut them all like that, maybe it'll be okay, but we can do better. So this one is much better. I just focused on putting the point kind of having some negative space below his belly, and then we've got the top of his head and his tail. I could have the birds facing alternating ways, but you know, I think I'm just gonna have the birds all be facing the same way, so it's like a little ring of birds. I think that would be super cute. So to take the template, again, I'm just gonna make sure that the point is just a little bit below his belly. This is touching his head just like it is here. And then his tail. And I'm not even sure if these birds are perfectly drawn on there. They might be even a little bit different, just the print itself. Looks like it's gonna look a little bit different. I can see like his foot is within that diamond. If I did that again, I'm gonna miss the tail. So that's a much more important element, is that tail. The little feet, you're hardly gonna be able to even see that. So just lift it, make sure. We'll just draw that in. I've got enough room. It's maybe not a full 1/2 inch, but I can definitely see having enough room there. So I'm mindful of that. So let's see, once we draw it out, we'll see how we did. It might take you a couple times to get this right. And if you use Myhre, which is clear templates, I have that somewhere, you can actually draw the bird out onto Myhre and then match it perfectly. But I am just working on the fly here. I don't have all my stuff down here in Canyon yet. So, but for this little block, you know, I'm not super hyper. I'm just making a block. Yeah, I'm happy with him. He's cute. So I'm going to do 6 of these fussy cut birds, glue them on just like the other pieces, and then I'm going to show you how to stitch them together. So you just need a teeny tiny little needle and regular sewing thread in a color that goes with like a neutral color, I would say, unless you want the stitches to show, which is valid and sometimes really cute. Okay, I love it. I think it's so cute. I'm super excited about this little hexie block. But to sew these together, it's crazy easy. You're just going to take the 2 sides. We'll start obviously with the inner working out, and we're just going to whip stitch this across. So I've got a thread here, since I'm using dark to light fabric. This is just it's blue, golden, brown, and it's got some light in there. So you probably won't see the thread too much, but the goal here is to pick up the tiniest amount of thread. So I've got a single strand of thread, picking up like 1 or 2 threads of each one and trying really hard not to go through the paper. Like, see that white one? That was just way too thick. There. And then I'm going to whip stitch it just really close together. Sixteenth of an inch. It seems like it's going to take a long time, but it really doesn't. I mean, Hexie stitching, English paper piecing, it goes really quickly, and it's so great to bring with you. It's just a great pack up and go project in the car or sitting at a game or wherever you just have to sit waiting in the doctor's office. It's just such a great thing to bring. So really close, 1/16 of an inch, just picking up. You can feel if you're going through the paper, so if you do, just back up. Because the goal is we want to get the paper out of there, and if you stitch through it, you're going to have little holes, and the thread is going to be locked up in the paper. So I don't know, hopefully you can see that, but it is just 1 or 2 threads there. Okay, so stitch it all the way down to the corner, and we'll add the next piece. Okay, and then when you lift up this piece, they're perfectly stitched together, and you can barely see the stitches. All right, so we'll fold that up. We'll add this piece, which will fit just right in here, and it looks like it's going to fit really well. Even go into the stitch from before just to not have any space. So I'm in the piece previously, just to take a little thread, take a thread from the new piece, and then you can continue your stitching, your whip stitch, which is just teeny tiny little threads. One 1/16 inch away from each other. It really is a very relaxing thing to do. I forgot how much I love doing English paper piecing and hexies. I might have to do more of that. And then as you're stitching, just adjust, make sure your corners are going to match up really well. You can stick a clip or a pin in there, but this piece is so small. When we get to the other bigger pieces, I may go ahead and utilize those clips. Okay, that's the second piece, and these will be great to stitch. Just all you have to do is fold it and stitch it in the same way. But it will be easier to fold once we get that center piece of paper out. So what I'm going to do is just work on stitching all of the sides down. So I'll take my next piece, make sure that's going to fit in there well, which it will. Perfect. All of these down, and then we'll take this paper out, and then we can fold this down and stitch that seam a little bit better. Okay, I've got my hexie, center hexie all surrounded. So the rule of thumb in English paper piecing is not to take out the paper until all sides are surrounded. So we are going to take out the center one. We're safe to do that. So just carefully peel back the seam allowances. There you go. And you still have your template with no holes or anything. So you can also make these on heavier cardstock. They'll last a little bit longer. But I'm definitely going to use this again because it's just one less step that I'll have to do. And now I can fold this piece a little bit easier to go ahead and stitch the sides up. So the next step, what I would do is I've already still got some thread coming out of that corner there. So I'm going to just nestle these seam allowances together, fold them right sides together always, and then stitch up to here. Then when I open that up, I'll be able to match up these corners, and then I'll be able to take this piece and stitch along here. Once I've stitched all the way across, I'll end the thread there. Then I'll take a new thread, go up the next one, and add this piece. Then we can take the paper out of here, and then we can add in our birds. So now I'm going to sit back, relax, and enjoy the slow stitching. All right, that was so fun. Love that kind of stitching. So once you get all of these on, that means these are all surrounded. You can take the paper out, and then we're going to do our last little pieces, our little birds, or my little birds. Can't wait to see what you guys are doing. And essentially it's the same thing. That little bird's going to just nestle right in there. So I'm just going to fold him, make sure that my bird is facing the way that I want him to. Make sure that your little bird is going to be right in the corner there. And then the edge of this template should line up with this edge here. And I just hold these little flags down, all the little seam allowances, while I stitch. So again, it's taking tiny, tiny little bites. Every 16th inch or so. Just doing a little whip stitch. All right, so I'll stitch all the way down to here. And now that I've got all the paper out, it's easy to just fold it and stitch it. I'll end the thread there and then just insert the bird on each one, and then you'll have this perfect little hexie. And the templates came out pretty okay, so I think I can get one or two more uses out of this. Now if you use cardstock, you can use them, as long as you don't pierce and tear too much of the edges, you can use them 3 or 4, maybe even 5 times. So if you're going to make a quilt with a lot of different hexies, then I would say print it out on heavier cardstock paper. But I'm going to now stitch these little birds on. Hooray! My hexie is all done and pieced together and looking great. So as far as pressing it out, I've taken all the paper out. When you press on the seams and you find that little Y seam there, all of the fabrics are going to want to press a certain way, the original way that you pressed them down when you glued them. So what I did was I just took my iron, I pressed down these seams again, and then once I had these all spread out all of the direction that they want to go, and I took the iron and pressed it right on top, and then I just kept coming down and I pressed here. So in every space, just do that. Make sure you know which way your seams wanted to face originally, and just press them down before you press the front of your block, because if you press the front without doing that, then your seams will just go every which way. So now there's a lot of different things that you can do with Hexies. So this size Hexie will piece perfectly on all of the sides because they're all 3 inches with other ones. So you can just build on this and make a big Hexie quilt. Here, this is so awesome. So my mom made me this little Hexie pin cushion. Obviously it's a smaller Hexie in the middle, 6 Hexies that surround it, and then she did the opposite fabrics on the other side, sewed around the at perimeter, and then stuffed it. And it's my favorite pin cushion. I use it all the time, and it nestles perfectly in my little ring of threads that I use. So I love this. So you could actually make a big pin cushion out of this, not even add the triangles, just make 2 of these spoke shapes and have a big pin cushion. Super awesome. One of my journals, I had made a pieced Hexie, much smaller, a long time ago, and then I just put it in my journal, and I was just trying some shapes and some spokes. I think I ran out of blue threads here. So this is definitely not my favorite page in my book, but it doesn't matter. It's my book. I can reference this Hexie that I did before, the French knots I did, you know, the spirals coming out. If I hadn't run out of blue beads as I was sitting there, this block would probably be prettier, but I don't know. I was just in the mood to finish it out, I guess. But for this particular one, I think I'm just going to put it in my journal with my other blocks. And so I'm just going to sew this to a 6.5 inch square. Now, originally my thought was I was thinking, oh, I would just put it on this fabric and match the inner, which might be good in some cases. In this case, though, it's okay. This kind of looks like it's floating. I mean, by the time I get this all sewn down, it'll just look like I have a little ring of birds and seeds, and that's fine. It's not terrible. Not exactly what I was thinking it was going to look like, but I found this fabric, and I really, really love this. So I'm going to center and pin this Hexie on this 6.5 inch block, and then I'm just going to applique it down and then put it in my journal with my other pages that I've been doing. And on this page, I'll go ahead and just fold these little edges down and whip stitch around. This is paper, the mulberry paper, but I'll just fold them down. I might fold them over the edge, I haven't decided yet. And that way, if I fold them over the edge, the next piece I put on here, this will be nice and folded down, and I can just put something right on the top. So yeah, I'm just gonna pin it, stitch it, put it in my journal, and then we're going to call this week good. Next week, I want to show you how to make a symmetrical drawing with a piece of paper. So you'll start with a 6 inch piece of just regular copy paper. You'll need mirrors, and then we're going to make a symmetrical design, stitch it out, and then paint it with Derwent Inktense pencils. So I want to show that. You could use regular markers too, because it's just a block. I might try this week to use some alcohol markers on fabric and just wash it and see if it stays. There's a lot of different things that you can do. Since we're just doing little art blocks here, you can really use anything that you might have at home. But if you have the Derwent Inktense pencils, this is a great time to play with those. I'm going to use aloe. I've showed this in a video a couple years ago. I did a video on Sukaniko inks and Derwent Inktense pencils, but I want to play with those again. So we will work on that next week. And I want to share a couple of blocks that have come through on Mandala Unplugged. This is Sarah's elephant, or Sashiko elephant. It's incredible. I love the fabric she chose for the ears, and the trim is lovely, and she crocheted some Oya to go with the trim that she used, and it's just a beautiful block, well done. And then Mary shared a photo of her building embroidery block, and this is just beautiful as well. Like the colors, the fabrics, the stitching, it's magnificent. So you guys, thank you so much for sharing your beautiful work. I always love to see them and add them to the digital Unity quilt. Yay! And I hope you've enjoyed this little Hexie block. I think I'm going to keep English paper piecing in my current repertoire because I really forgot how much I love doing it and the accuracy you can achieve while stitching with paper. So until next time, happy stitching, have a great week, and we'll see you next Sunday. Thanks so much. Bye-bye.